This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
It's 11:06 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. Time now for Ask a Rabbi.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, here to answer your questions on Ask a Rabbi. Feel free to give me a call at 772-340-1590. And so I'm going to start out with a question actually that was posed to our congregation on the web through our website, because I'm going to answer it right now in here, just in case she might be listening. And that question was, can I come to services? And the answer is absolutely. We don't stop anybody from coming to our services unless they're actively disrupting. It's a house of worship for God, and we're not going to stop you. You're welcome. Whether we recognize you or not, we might ask you who you are. We might ask you what brings you to Port St. Lucie, but that's not in a hostile way. That's in a getting to know you kind of way.
I think she may have been asking, do I need to have a ticket? Do I need to pay? I think that's probably where the question came from.
No, we don't. You don't pay for services.
I was going to say, pay to go to a temple.
We do. Well, we do ask you to help support the congregation because a congregation.
That's everybody,
right?
Yeah.
That's everybody because a congregation, pays rent, pays utilities.
Certainly. That's.
Pays salaries, pays this, pays insurance, pays food, all those things that go into making a congregation. A congregation has those expenses. God, unfortunately, doesn't give us a tree that we can go out and pluck the dollar bills off of. It just doesn't work that way. So anyway, and we'll take it from there. So, yeah, you are absolutely welcome. Friday nights at 7:30. And Shabbat mornings, we have Stolen Moments at 9:30, and then services start at 10:30. And we're going to be having a bar mitzvah celebration on the 15th of June, that weekend. One of our soon-to-be a young teenager, not an adult, but a teenager, is going to be leading services and chanting from Torah. And he's been studying really hard. He'll be translating what he reads. So, and I love that. I love when kids own the Torah and they own the service. And this young man, I believe, will do that.
But I think you got to explain for people to understand when they translate what they've really had to do in order to do that.
They have to learn the vocabulary. They're not going to walk out on the street in Israel. And first of all, it's Torah Hebrew, which is different from modern spoken Hebrew. Just as medieval Spanish is different from modern Spanish, and Old English is different.
You're not requiring them to
English.
Memorize. They're doing something else.
Oh, I absolutely forbid them to memorize. They actually learn it. They learn how to chant the Torah. They don't have a tape. They learn it by learning the notes and practicing it until they master it. And then they learn the vocabulary, and they get to learn that Hebrew sentence structure is not quite like English.
So I think the magic of it to me, when obviously I saw my son do it, is that they learn enough vocabulary for their portion of the Torah.
Right.
That when they're standing there looking at the Torah, which doesn't even have vowels, they're able to look at those words and not only chant the Hebrew, but they're able to look at those Hebrew words without vowels, right, and see the English. Yeah, and that's amazing.
It is. It's a big step, and it's funny because I warn the kids, the boys and girls, and the youth that's going to be the hardest part of what they're going to do, but what it does in the formation of their brains, it's phenomenal. I mean, I always knew that as a child matures and goes through the bar bat mitzvah process the way that I've been teaching it for a while, many decades, that I could see the change in the child. And now that I've studied psychology and a little bit of how the brain develops, now I understand much better why it does what it does. But it really does. It totally changes their ability to think and to even do critical thinking, a little bit more processing.
Now, in Florida, do they have, I know in L.A. they had Hebrew schools that started basically in kindergarten and, went all the way up through high school.
Graduate.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and in some high schools even teach Hebrew as a foreign language. That's modern Hebrew, though, which is a little bit different. And, Israelis laugh at me because I speak this weird combination of scriptural, modern Hebrew because I lived in Israel for a while. And I didn't just live in the American dorm. I lived out in an apartment because I wanted to interact more and use the language
kind of like
way.
Spanglish?
Yeah, well, what's interesting to me, right, it's that old primacy error or fallacy, right? Because I learned it a certain way, and Hebrew is changing. Hebrew is a living language, any spoken language. Right, our grandparents did not learn about bytes and bits and texting and are you okay? Right, are you okay?
LOL.
Yeah, LOL and all those other things, right? So language changes, and it has to. And in fact, we're probably accelerating the speed at which it changes. And so Hebrew is changing, and I'm like, it sounds funny to me, so I'm sure that I sound even funnier to Israelis right now. But my family in Israel tolerates me when I struggle to speak.
Can I give a little pitch of how you train kids?
Sure.
Because if there are people out there who are Jewish and they have kids, I think it's important. I really do.
Okay, go.
I've told you before, when I had my bar mitzvah, I did most of the service. I've never seen anybody do that since. For all the 40 years, 45 years, they'd read the Torah portion, they'd do a prayer or two, but essentially the rabbi led their services, except when I met you. And we've had 3 now in our own congregation, this new one, and we had others in the prior congregation that I saw. But these kids, the way you train them, they perform the entire Friday night service and the entire Saturday morning service. The only thing you do is the mourner's Kaddish, which you have to do, maybe the rabbi's sermon, but they do it all.
Yeah, mostly.
Turn to page 42. They learn how to run the service, and it is amazing not only that they learn to do all that and all the prayers and all the English, but I saw particularly the last bar mitzvah with my sons 2 years ago. And I remember very vividly something. As he got up there at the very beginning of Friday night services, you were not standing there with him. You were sitting. Mm-hmm. And you motioned to him to start. And he turned back and he looked at you as if for help. And you just looked at him and, with a wave like, go ahead. And he started. And as he progressed through Friday evening, he changed. Mm-hmm. He was no longer looking at you for help. He was getting more comfortable with the ability that he now had to lead the service. Right. And so when Saturday morning came, Mr. Cocky there, he wasn't looking to you to help him through it. You had more involvement on the Saturday morning service. Mm-hmm. But he ran the service, and mm-hmm. he ran it well. He ran it with confidence. And what I have seen with all the B'nai Mitzvah in our young congregation, and I'm seeing it right now in the one to be in a couple weeks, mm-hmm. there is a transformation that these kids go through, a honest-to-goodness transformation. Oh, they don't become Stepford kids, and they don't obey every word that mom and dad say.
Not even close.
But there is a transformation in confidence, in self-image. And that is not something I saw in any other temple I've ever been a part of, other than when I was first, bar mitzvahed in 1973.
And I'm going to take a wild guess that in 1973 the service was not technologically anywhere near as complex, and probably not even as long.
No, not at all.
And I'm joking right now, but I see the mother of one of the B'nai Mitzvah from Tucson who's watching, so a shout out to you, Amanda. And not only was her son one of the amazing B'nai Mitzvah that I've worked with and did an amazing job of what he did, but I've actually had contact with him. He went on a birthright trip not too long ago, and so when I go through this process with the youth, it's not bye, see ya right afterwards, right? And we see that with our youth in the temple. They stay engaged, they're still participating, they're still active because they own it.
And that's another difference. In many congregations I've been a part of, once the kids have their bar bat mitzvah, they do disappear. They've done what their parents forced them to do, and now they're gone. And you're right. In our congregation, I suspect the ones you were a part of in Arizona as well, in our congregation, for the most part, they do remain involved, to some extent, some more than others, because it wasn't shoved down their throat, even though they had to do a lot more. It was taught in a way that they enjoy it and they want to come back. I think that's a wonderful thing because they really are the future of Judaism. And if we lose them, even if we lose them right after B'nai Mitzvah, we're losing treasure.
Yeah. Well, and as Sharon just typed on to Facebook, she says they also understand more of what it is to be part of community because of the way that we train them. It's always been sad to me. I teach a bar or bat mitzvah the way my father taught. I'm not really doing anything radically new. I'm not the innovator. The innovator was my father, if indeed he was. I don't know if he was or if he was following his teacher's models. But yeah, I led the service at my bat mitzvah. Now, what was a little bit radical with that was that there weren't a whole lot of batei mitzvah. There weren't a whole lot of women yet doing it. I can remember chanting Torah and looking at my grandmother just, awestruck, because for a woman to do that for my grandmother was significant. She came down from New York, from Brooklyn, with some of my uncles. And they got to watch the little girl, I'm not tall, stand up and, actually master what was going on in the Torah. Now, I didn't do the translating at mine. And the translating is, that's a skill, and I'm going to give a shout out to a cantor, Jack Kessler, teaches that to rabbis. And it was so profound to me, there was an experience. It's a little bit weird. I was raised trilingual. I spoke Hebrew with my father. I spoke German with my mother. And I spoke English, of course, in school and with my friends. And if both parents were together, sometimes we'd speak in English rather than the individual languages.
So explain the translating part.
Okay, so the translating, as Stuart said, the Torah itself is just the letters, the consonants of the Hebrew words, which is the way Scriptures has been written for thousands of years. If you look at a Dead Sea Scroll, it looks the same way. It's just the consonants. And the initial scribes did that intentionally. They wanted to job security. They wanted to make it difficult.
Sounds like an engineer.
To learn how to read and write. And, as I tell people, the unfortunate part is they were successful. It is a challenge, but you do get used to it. And if you think about it, you can read an English paragraph if it doesn't have vowels. You might make a mistake or two here and there, but for the most part, you're not going to.
You see that test on Facebook all the time. If you can read
if
this.
You can read this.
Because your brain fills in the blanks.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the same thing happens when when you've studied the Torah portion and you know the notes, right? If it's memorized, you don't really look at it. But if you've learned it, then you have to look at those letters in the Torah, and your mind fills in the blanks. It puts the notes and the vowels in their place. And, that always astounded me when I was young and learning to chant Torah. It's like, okay, God, how'd you do that one? But your brain does. It knows what goes there. And as long as it's got the cues, it fills it in. You might make a mistake here or there, but not too many. And if you memorize it, though, and you trip, then you lose everything because and I used to do all kinds of things to make sure that students weren't memorizing. And I still do. And you've seen them. I'll change letters and make them work and chant and sight read and things like that so that they really do get it. And then we get to the translation piece. So here's a couple of reasons of why I do that. I'm really emphatic, if you will, because since I was raised on it, when I hear Torah chanted, I know what it's saying. I understand the story. I get engaged in the Hebrew. And so much was funny because that cantor, Jack Kessler, did a beautiful tape of High Holiday melody for the Torah portion. And the Torah story is the story of Abraham taking his son up on the mountain and binding his son and putting him on the altar. And the tape had a defect in it. And the tape was right as Abraham lifts the knife to slaughter Isaac, and that's where the tape stopped. And I was listening to it just to learn the High Holiday melody, and I'm listening to this tape, and I'm riding down the road in West by God, Virginia, or somewhere. We were going somewhere, and I have the little cassette and the cassette player in my car, my van.
What's a cassette?
Watch it.
What's a cassette?
That'll
Yeah,
show your
what's
age.
a cassette? Yeah. And it hits this problem, and I'm flipping it, and it's not on the other side. The tape is short, and and it was a little series of tapes, and I actually pulled off the road and pulled into a rest stop and called Jack and said, "You can't do this to me. I can't handle it with Isaac on the altar all tied up." And he's laughing on the other end. But that's because I was so engrossed in the Hebrew, and the melody was just taking me to wherever the melody takes you. And so, yeah, it was like, I can't do this. And of course, I know the story, so I know how it comes out, right? It's all there in Genesis. But that's how it is for me when I hear Hebrew. Right, and the kids are like, how do you know to correct me if you're not looking at the paper? Because I'm not always looking at the paper. It's because I know Hebrew. And I know how it works, even if I don't.
And that's the shame of it. I mean, really, yeah. I've mentioned this a few times. The idea that, we do a lot in English, and you can always read the English translation to see what the prayer says. But there are so many beautiful melodies and so many beautiful songs, and I love doing them. Yeah. But I have no idea what I'm saying.
Well, we can fix that. So anyway, finishing up with my story, I'm there at Davening Leaders Training Institute, okay, which is one of the courses we had to take in rabbinical school, and we have a Swedish student there, a Swedish rabbinical student, and she. Excuse me, there's this little thing here. But she chants in Swedish. I don't know Swedish.
Ooh, okay.
I know German, so I'm getting like a teeny bit of it. Like
not every third
much.
Word, right?
Yeah, maybe, if that much. And I'm like, it was an aha phenomena to me. Because I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what it's like for the average American Jew to listen to Torah. It's this sing-song melody with be-ba boo-ba ba 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 da ba da boo da ba da ba da boo da ba. And I'm like, oh, how opaque is that?
And that's why so many of us turn off of it on Saturday.
Well,
we don't like it.
And in a traditional Orthodox congregation, right, you not only read a third, but you read the whole Torah portion.
Yeah.
You know, it goes for an hour, and it's brrr, and you know, and I can't even say that I stay tuned in, knowing the Hebrew sometimes because of the way it's done. And so when Chazan Jack Kessler taught sing the English to the Hebrew, I was like, oh, that changes it totally, and that engages people. And so I incorporated that almost immediately into B'nai Mitzvah training, because I found that what that did was two things. One, as you pointed out, it really helps the child become much more mature, much more skilled, and they start to own their Torah portion. And not only do they understand the Torah portion, but because so much of prayer is right out of scriptures, they start to, they may not understand the prayer, but now they've got a couple of words that they get it, and it pops the prayer for them, if you will. And so I find that's really, really important. And, it doesn't take but maybe 100 to 200 words to really open up the prayer book for most people. So you don't have to learn thousands of words, because liturgical Hebrew is not that diverse in language. Think about it. Prayers talk about a limited amount of subjects, and so does Scripture. So you don't have to have tons and tons of words. Now, can they turn around and speak Hebrew? No. Can they take a text that doesn't have words that they know? They might get some of it. They're not going to get all of it. And they're not going to get all of the nuances. I'm there to help them work through the nuances and say, well, that's past tense, that's future tense, this sort of thing, because I know that they don't have the grammar structure. That takes longer than the amount of time that we have available to work with the act. Now, if I've got a child that I've really worked with from the get-go, and they've been able to study Hebrew all along, they're going to have a lot more of it before they hit B'nai Mitzvah age. I have not usually had that luxury. And
so how long do the kids study for this?
Usually a year intensely,
Okay.
and it gets a lot more intense the last 6 months. And I've got a timetable that takes it and says 7 months out, you should have the ability to decode Hebrew, not to read it, but to decode it. There's a difference between decoding and reading. And that's true in English, it's true in any language. Excuse me. If you don't know the language, if you don't speak it, you're not reading it. You're decoding it. You're sounding out the values for the letters. Right. And, I teach English to Chinese students, and I see them as they progress from, I know which ones have a little bit of interaction with English because they read very differently and they decode very differently. And the same is true when an English speaker has no spoken Hebrew around them. They're not attuned to the melody of the language. They don't, that piece isn't there. So you have to kind of build it for them. And so one of the first things that I start is with this is the rhythm of Hebrew. And so they've got to be able to decode, and then they've got to be able to decode properly. And decoding properly means be able to read it such that, you're not going to fool an Israeli. They're not going to think you speak Hebrew, but you need to at least be literate with it. You need to, if I throw a piece of Hebrew at you with the vowels, right, so you've got that piece, you should be able to read it. You should be able to decode it. And then we go from there, and they learned that one of the prayers that we sing in the Friday night service or the Saturday morning service actually is sung in Torah notes. And so I use that as the bridging gap to teach them, this song, now we're going to take it and we're going to reshape it. You're used to singing it this way, but here's the same words in a different order. And then when they start to do it, they go, oh, I've always got this same melody. Ma, 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 ma. It's got this tone to it. Torah notes are not A, B, C, D. They're trope. They're a set of notes. So one is ha ha, and another one's ha. So you've got these bits of melody, and the students learn that, and then they realize that, oh, okay, and then they can take a sheet that's prepared, and those documents are all over. You can get them on the web even, and but that have the notes for the Torah reading, and those have not changed, which is interesting, right? That's called the Masoret. It's the tradition, and those notes have been around for a very long time. Now, are they all the same? No, right. Different groups of Jews have different.
Yeah,
melodies.
you make me say when I want to say
That's not even. I'm not even going into that. That's a dialect within the Hebrew.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
are there different?
Yeah,
dialects?
there are dialects. Yeah. So, for example, an Iraqi Jew, right, a Jew that came from Iraq,
Okay.
their Hebrew is going to sound a lot more Arabic, which makes sense, right? A Yemenite is going to have a slightly different sentence structure and a different pronunciation. And, dialects in Luxembourg, which is, you can drive across Luxembourg, except that it's up and down, really high and low. But they've got dialects within their little cities, within that little tiny country. So, of course, Hebrew has dialects, because, Hebrew is spoken by Jews all over the world. So a Spanish Jew is going to sound a little different from a German Jew or an American Jew.
Or a Louisiana Jew.
Yeah.
Y'all.
Oh, yeah. Here's a funny story. Okay, this is from the year that I was in Israel, and my roommate and I we went to the Israel Museum. It's a great. If you're ever in Jerusalem, go to the Israel Museum. Plan a good amount of time to be there, because the artwork and the scrolls and everything, and the outdoor sculpture and the indoor stuff, it's a phenomenal complex.
Now, where was your roommate from?
My roommate was, we had been college roommates. And went to Israel. Both of us were going to go into becoming a rabbi. And we both got derailed for different reasons, which is interesting. But we were both doing the 1 year in Israel. And so we had taken this day. I don't know if there wasn't school or if we were playing hooky. I don't know. But in any event, we went to the museum, and we're sitting there on a bench just outside the main building, resting. We were going to go over to the outdoor sculpture. We just figured we'd sit for a few minutes and then head over. And as we're sitting there, out from the building walks this little kid who's probably studying for his bar mitzvah celebration. And he turns to his mother and he says, "I learned it in school. Who called Rabbi Ivrit?" And the southern accent on the Hebrew, that heavy, just the two of us just cracked up and started rolling. And I'm sure they thought Israelis were horribly rude. Not thinking that we were American and just laughing at the southern accent in the Hebrew. But it was definitely there.
That's great.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
a great story.
Yeah, I created a few incidents like that when I was in Israel. Because we dressed Israeli. We were jeans and T-shirts like the Israelis were. We didn't look the tourist part because we were living there for a year. And that was funny. My Hebrew was significantly better than hers, but she heard that one, and we were both from Philadelphia, so it sounded very strange. But I had spent a year in the South. My father had done an interim stint as an interim rabbi in South Carolina. And I learned to speak South Carolina. Y'all, I can do it. And back in those, I'm going to date myself again, because that's in the day when you used to call up on the phone and you used to say, "Hi, is Sally home?" "Oh, no, she'll be home in 10 minutes. "Oh, okay, I'll call back." Right? Because that way you didn't have to pay for a toll call person to person. You could find out that somebody was home. That old trick that we used to do. And, the way that you did it is that you gave the number to the operator and they dialed it for you. Right? You didn't dial it because we had these little round things that went tick, 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 tick. And
A rotary phone?
A rotary phone, yes. And so I have this operator on the line, and I'm trying to call my friend in Philadelphia, and I'm trying to give the number to her, and she's like, She does not speak Northern English at all. And I finally just said, okay, it is 215, and gave the number in the thickest accent I could muster. And then the call went through. She understood it completely.
Not a Yankee. Huh?
Yeah, and I confess I used that Southern accent that I learned a couple of times. I got stopped once for something on a traffic. Maybe no, I don't think I got stopped on traffic. I was doing something in the car, and I had a South Carolina driver's license because I came of age in South Carolina, and got my driver's license there, and I'm in Pennsylvania, and I just put on that thick accent a couple of times, and boy, it's amazing how much more help I got. I have to tell you, guys just really fall for anything female that sounds like that.
Put on a blonde wig, see what happens.
Oh, yeah, that'll do it even more. Yeah. So, yeah, language is interesting. And we have dialects in the U.S., right? As people joke about whether you call it soda or pop or a phosphate. In New York, it was a phosphate.
Sprinkles or Jimmy's.
Sprinkles or Jimmy's or
a ka.
A ka? It's your blinker, man. Your blinker. And I guess partially because of all of the different things that I've done in my life, I've just got friends from all over, so I hear all the different American accents. And speaking of California, we lived in California at a formative part of my life, and it's diamond, right? It's not diamond, it's diamond. You hear the A in diamond.
Diamond bar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's these little subtle things that when you tune your ear, you can get very good at hearing it, but you also can ignore it. The other side of that was that, and yes, Rabbi Karpov, I am recording it, and it's going to stay on Facebook, so you can find it there. It's also going to be on YouTube, where the station puts it up as Ask a Rabbi, so you can get all of those things. And but yeah, and now I lost my thought with answering that question. The joys of our minds. And so, and people are putting on here, I'm trying to lose my accent. You can consciously lose your accent by tuning your ear and hearing it. And, it's funny because I've been told that during a service, I will go into an Israeli accent for my Hebrew and I'll come out of it. And I have a feeling that part of it is, I'm getting sloppy because I'm not speaking enough Israeli Hebrew to Israelis, that I keep the accent sharp. And the other side of that, because my family there all speaks English, and many of my friends speak English. My niece, by the way, I'm going to give a shout out for anyone who, my niece and my sister-in-law and my nephew and his wife and 2 kids lived in that settlement that was just burned in a forest fire. Everybody was evacuated, but they don't even know how extensive the damage is. Nobody's allowed back into the area yet. They believe that everything wood is totally gone, and maybe some of the stone buildings are still up. But a forest fire just went right through the moshav, the settlement, and totally wiped it out. The Alliance of Christians and Jews is running a fundraiser, and if you go to my Facebook site, you'll see it there, trying to raise some money because these folks were evacuated with the clothes on their back. They lost everything.
How large a community was it?
40-some families in that one, and there's other communities that were also in the fire. If you go to Jewish Press has got some on it, JTA's got some on it, Haaretz English has got some on it. Jerusalem Online, when I checked this morning, did not have the story. So it's interesting to me what media is covering and not covering. Right, here's people that have just totally lost everything.
I saw the fire story on Fox News.
Okay.
They had it on there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that fire, yeah. So yeah, that Homo Shav is gone, and a lot of my friends are there too. Now that's another ironic piece, because I have friends that I've known for years, And I only reconnected with my sister-in-law a couple of years ago. And she lives in that community, or lived in that community. The community, I understand from a post from my niece, says that they plan to rebuild, and they don't know where or how yet. But right now we're just trying to get them some food and some clothing. Mostly they're living with relatives, or there's a youth camp where they've taken up residence. So it's, kind of rough when you lose, and it's a forest fire, so, those things, Tucson lost a big part of Mount Lemmon in that forest fire. And forest fires, when they get going, they are.
As we saw in
California.
Northern California, it was brutal. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It just is brutal, and it's devastating to everything that lives there, wild animals, and the people who've built their homes in there too. So that's going on. That was my afternoon yesterday. Was trying to deal with some of that, and but anyway, back to it. My niece speaks English. She's visited the U.S. She's not a U.S. citizen. She's the daughter of a U.S. citizen. She was born and raised in Israel, and she speaks English almost like a native. Not quite. There's a couple of really interesting little quirks that she's got, but she can hold her own in a conversation.
Okay.
And you wouldn't pick up that it wasn't just an Eastern accent. So, because she speaks the same English that her parents spoke, and that the rest of the Americans that have transplanted into these communities. So, lots of that kind of thing. So accents are very interesting, and whether they're in Hebrew or in English. And so you tune your ear to it. So I was talking earlier about going back and forth between an American Hebrew and an Israeli Hebrew. To me, the Israeli Hebrew is much softer, much more melodious and beautiful. And the American accent is harsh. And that's probably nicer than what an Israeli would say of it. But we do a couple of letters very differently. And you just get tuned to that. So let me fast forward, though, and talk as a psychologist now for a moment and say that it really is really important for kids to be multilingual. And now we have the science to back up that statement. Bilingual, trilingual kids have it easier. They just have it easier. It builds a lot of pathways that people who only learn one language, regardless of what language it is, don't have. And that's unfortunate because we put a lot of American children at a disadvantage that way. But
well, it seems you can go most places in the world and they speak English.
That's true. But what you lose is a couple of things. And it even gets into attitude. Because when you speak two languages, you learn a lot more about nuance and subtlety. Because no two languages map one-to-one to each other. And so I can't take an English sentence and word for word say it in Hebrew. I've got to shift and change and make decisions in the translation. And the same is true with German and English, or German and Hebrew, or English and Spanish. And, it's one of the things that I love to do in the class. When I'm teaching at IRSC, I'll ask how many students speak more than one language. And, 6 or 7 hands will go up in the average class of 30 to 40. And, and I'll ask them, I'll say, rather than my telling you this, can you word for word translate from one language into the other? And they'll stop for a second because they haven't thought about it. And they'll say, well, no, you can't. Or every once in a while I'll have one who'll say yes. And then I say, okay, translate for me, Jim is sharp. Now, you have to make a decision. Which meaning of sharp am I intending?
Yeah.
Right? Because in Spanish you don't have, or Italian or whatever other language they speak, you don't just have one word that has all of the nuance and meaning of sharp.
Well, and that's why that when you get to translators and you start getting to places like the UN or, supposedly President Trump and President Putin sit down and they have the translators, these people have to be the best translators around because they're being relied upon to interpret. Because they're not just translating word for word.
No, they're trying to translate
like
on
the
the context.
UN translators.
Yeah.
They have to be really good.
It's instant translations. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes they'll stop and verify it, right? Of course, in the UN they don't have that option. They're doing the best they can, and I've been at conferences and stuff where there are instant translations done for people of other languages, and it's not easy. I do it for Torah, but I'd hate to do it for something. For somebody talking. That's just a tremendous. They've got to get used to doing that, and they've got to, in some ways, get to know the person for whom they're doing the translation. And I'm sure that that's true with government translators, so that when the person is translating, say, President Trump's English to Russian, right, it's somebody who knows his language styles and what he's trying to say in the words that he's using.
It was interesting. The Rotary clubs in Port St. Lucie had an exchange student who went to Centennial for a year. She was from India. She spoke 6 languages.
Yeah.
So, she was explaining to me that some of her fellow students were just staring at her because she could speak so many languages,
Right.
And here they were barely mastering English.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that. Never mind, I won't go there.
I know where you're going. Yeah.
And it's, and Google Translate is wonderful because it helps, but, oh my gosh.
Sort of,
yeah. Right. You need to take it and massage it a lot. And that's already a fairly smart software tool. Because, boy, if you look at what Google used to translate 4 or 5 years ago, what they do now is miles ahead because they have learned, right? There's an artificial intelligence in the translation software that learns, just as Siri, right? When I start a new phone, Siri and I have to get to know each other, right? And if you've paid attention to your phone...
Now, wait a minute.
No, seriously, Siri learns your dialect and your habits and incorporates that in something called fuzzy logic. And that's why it gets better at following your instructions after you've had a phone for a while. Because whichever voice-actuated software you have, it has modified its internal program to handle your speech habits.
Wow.
Yeah, and actually, when I first got the phone, in the program, Siri a couple of times actually asked me to repeat something. And I'm sure that was the software learning my inflection and my intonation. Language is fascinating. And the thing that I'm having a lot of fun with the Chinese that I'm working with are the facial expressions and and the body language, that what is and isn't different. Right? Because some things are different, but a smile matters all over the world. Everybody smiles, and everybody knows that a smile, and people know when it's genuine and when it's not, right?
Yeah,
well, right. The fake smile that when people say smile for the photo, and you that's a grimace. It's not a smile, and you can tell the difference. And, some people, it's not even a curve up on the face. It's just, I don't really want to be doing this. I won't say who that is, but everybody who knows me knows who that is. And, but, I spent a lot of time with the kids, and they know when you're legitimately smiling. They know when you're paying attention to them and when you're not. We do a lot with body language, and that's interesting. And, of course, that's part of what we have. Some of it in the radio because you have the inflection in the voice.
You bet.
And that matters. Now, if you go down to text, you even lose that. You lose that inflection, and sometimes you have to kind of put it in. And that, I think, is part of what the Torah notes are intended to do. they're intended to give you the inflection of the story so that you really understand it. Now, here's somebody typed in here the difference between like hair and hair, a hare a rabbit and hair your hair, and all of the homophones and things like that, because they can change meaning as well on things. But there's also words that just in Hebrew, the same letters can mean very different things depending on the context. And I actually had an effect of that with Ryan in his Torah portion. It talks about putting something in the hands of the Nazirite, and then it talks about as the oath, according to the oath. And when you just look on the Torah portion, the words look the same, but in the context, you can't mistake that. And why that's funny is because when I make up the vocabulary for them, what I do is I parse each of the words and I translate it. And I must not, when we first started doing it, and he translated it, and I was like, no, that's according. And I looked at his notes and I didn't have according down. Right, because I had just seen what I apparently had thought was palm, and figured, oh well, he's had that word already in the previous paragraph, because I don't give them words they have already when I'm the way I do it, and so he got an important lesson in it might look the same, but it doesn't mean the same, and that's another piece, right? And, which gets back to, what is your definition of what is, right? Depends on your definition of is. And
Bill who? Oh.
Yeah.
I do not have
No.
What I get a big kick out of, you want to talk about that, it's all the white males in class who say, I don't have any privilege. You don't even know what privilege is because you have it. And it's just the way it is. And privilege is not having to think about all those things that people who don't have it have to think about and work around.
It's interesting. You bring up the privilege. The young lady that I worked with at KVOA, who became the first black anchor in the history of Texas, posted something when they had the picture of the black graduates, from was West Point, I think. And she said, wouldn't it be nice someday when we don't have to say black graduates, but just graduates?
Or don't have to worry about women
or women, black women graduates.
Or of color, right? We can just be people,
right? Exactly.
But we have a long history of that, right? All men are created equal. Depends on your definition of men. Yeah, right?
There we go.
Right? Because as I like to point out to my class, women have not even had the vote for 100 years yet. Coming up close. We're getting there. But blacks, 1965, right? And that to me is even more appalling in so many ways, because the genetic material that determines your skin color is so small, such a minute part of our really complex DNA, and not even a thumb's length of material, if we took the genome and mapped it through the whole room, determines skin color and things like that. So it's not a very big part of who and what we are, and yet it's so much a big part of people's lives. And there's always been privilege. And what's interesting is, as you watch, there have always been people who understand that people are equal in God's eyes, and people need to be judged based on what they bring to the table, not on some other parameter, whether it's visual or language or any of those things. It needs to be, you know, what kind of person are they? What do they bring to the table? That's what matters. You know, are they somebody who, you know, you can trust what they say, you can trust what they say they're going to do? Those are important things, not, you know, whether they style their hair one way, whether they're blonde or brunette, wear glasses, don't wear glasses, dark, light, purple, polka dotted. You know, none of that really matters. But, you know, even when I look at like the early rabbis, right, talk about wanting to equalize the role of women in a Greek culture, because the Greeks, right, thank you, Aristotle, women are naturally inferior to men, not at all. Aristotle, you might have been great, but not that great, at least not in that area. Did not have a good understanding of slaves and did not have a good understanding of women. But taught it to a lot of people because he taught it to Alexander the Great, who imbibed it well and took it all over. But if you look at what they think of as equalizing, they're not even beginning to come close to equalizing. They're just barely giving a little bit of being human back to people who've had it stolen. And, you know, so we've got a long ways to go before we get it, that God created all beings and we're all equal. We really, really are. And there's a phrase that most of my Muslim friends repeatedly point out, which is, you'll be surprised who gets into heaven. You never know. It's up to God. It's not up to us. And right, we teach that in Judaism too. We say, you know, we're not supposed to judge. Vengeance is mine, says God. You know, would that we could learn some of that. Would that we could really take some of these principles and move them forward and make them meaningful. So anyway, you know, it's been a great session today, and I hope that you think so. I don't know, but hot issues I'm seeing here written down on Facebook, and I hope that you think that we did touch on some things. Maybe next week you'll give me a call on Ask a Rabbi at 772-340-1590, although I am told that when my speech is too interesting, people don't like to interrupt it. And so what can I say, folks? I hope that it was that for you. Please do join us at Congregation Eitz Chayim. We are across from Met Stadium, 540 Northwest University Boulevard, Suite 102. That's the front center of the first building you come into when you come into the West Park office complex. Blue buildings on University Boulevard across from Met Stadium. Friday night services are 7:30 p.m. Stolen Moments, again, 9:30, and services at 10:30. And we now have a meditation class Mondays at 1. So I hope you'll check at least one of those things out. Please feel free to give me a call next week on Ask a Rabbi. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim.
You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, WPSL.com, webcaster to the world on Alexa and Google Home.